Imagine a ship that, in terms of sheer scale, feels closer to a skyscraper than to a familiar vessel. This is MSC Irena, a giant container ship that is essentially a floating city, more than 300 meters long, a container wall as tall as a 25-story building, and a total weight of hundreds of thousands of tons. And then a perfectly logical question appears. How does something this enormous not sink, keep moving, and still manage to safely pass through the narrowest and busiest straits on the planet? Let's break it down step by step, and along the way, see how one idea from an ordinary long-haul trucker turned world trade upside down. Welcome to the channel for the richest. Luxury life. In the spring, quite recently, a landmark event took place in the Chinese shipbuilding center at a shipyard in Yichang. Two steel monsters floated out of the dock at the same time, MSC Irena and her sister ship, MSC Loreto. The construction of each took only about 144 days. By the standards of these dimensions, it's almost like high-speed Lego assembly, only made of steel, turbines, and kilometers of cabling. These vessels are the first in their class and among the largest container ships that have ever gone to sea. And this is only the beginning. Several more sister ships are already on the way. The world is used to big ships, but the appearance of such super container carriers is a whole new level of the game. Size that makes your head spin. To understand the scale, let's translate dry numbers into images that feel more tangible. Length, about 400 meters. Beam, more than 60 meters. Draft, about 15 meters. That is, the part of the hull hidden underwater. In other words, if you parked MSC Irena next to a football stadium, she would calmly cover it in length. And in width, that is an entire city block with buildings and roads. An empty ship weighs about 250,000 tons. For comparison, a modern United States aircraft carrier with aircraft on board is more than twice as light in displacement. But the most impressive thing is not even the tonnage, it is the capacity. In maritime logistics, everything is counted in TEU, a conventional unit equal to one 20-foot container. MSC Irena can take on board about 24.3 thousand of these containers. Try to imagine it. If each container were filled, for example, with boxes of sneakers, you could dress several major countries. How a giant glides over water. Logic suggests the bigger the ship, the more the water slows it down. But engineers learned long ago how to cheat physics a little. One of MSC Irena's technologies is air lubrication of the hull. Along the bottom, there are special nozzles that release millions of air bubbles. As a result, a thin layer of air appears between the steel plating and the water. Resistance drops, and the vessel literally glides, spending less fuel for the same speed. The difference seems small, but when a ship sails for weeks, fuel savings turn into millions of dollars and tons of carbon dioxide that never get released into the atmosphere. Electricity from a spinning shaft. The second hidden miracle of technology on board is what are called shaft generators. Normally, electricity on a ship is produced by separate diesel generators. The engine turns a shaft, the shaft turns a generator, the generator produces current. But a container ship already has a gigantic main engine that rotates the propeller shaft and spins the propeller. Engineers thought, why burn fuel on extra engines if the shaft is already rotating? A shaft generator simply taps into the already working shaft and, using its rotation, produces electricity for navigation, lighting, safety systems, air conditioning, and hundreds of other consumers. Fewer separate engines means less fuel consumption and a lower risk of breakdowns. For a shipping company, that sounds like music. How the world lived before containers. Today we are used to it. Containers, cranes, a port, everything works like an assembly line, but it was far from always being this way. Before, cargo was carried in break bulk format. Bags, barrels, boxes, crates, bundles, bales, every manufacturer packed goods however they wanted. In the port, all of this was unloaded and loaded by hand. Thousands of stevedores and dock workers spent hours carrying cargo like a giant Tetris with no standard at all. Loading a ship was slow. Unloading was even slower. Get the balance wrong and you risk losing the vessel in a storm. On average, to fully load an ordinary cargo ship took 8 hours of heavy manual labor, and sometimes more. Speed, predictability, and savings were a dream back then, not reality. The trucker who reloaded world trade. Fast forward to the 20th century. In the United States, an ordinary long-haul trucker lives and works, a man named Malcolm McLean. He is not a sailor, not a captain, not a port owner. He is simply tired of standing in lines. Every one of his trips ended with the same thing. The cargo had to be unloaded from the truck body box by box and then manually pushed onto a ship. Time, money, nerves, everything went down the drain. McLean asked himself a simple question. What if you do not unload the truck at all? What if you simply take the entire body, or a standardized box taken from that body, and put it straight onto the deck of a ship? That simple thought became a revolution. He bought an old tanker from the Second World War era and rebuilt it so that it could take on board several dozen identical metal boxes, prototypes of modern containers. The first experiment showed stunning numbers. Loading costs fell by tens of times, literally down to cents per ton. Ship owners realized billions were hidden here. Within a few years, the whole world began massively converting old ships and building new ones designed solely for containers. The emergence of container liners. At first, these were hybrids, former tankers or bulk carriers with welded guides and reinforced decks. But by the end of the 60s, a new generation appeared, ships originally designed around containers. Inside the hull of such vessels, special cells were made for containers, and above, flat decks on which cranes could work almost like on a chessboard. Cranes on the ships themselves were no longer needed. All heavy equipment moved to shore. That helped increase usable space, but forced ports around the world to fit into a new reality. Build terminals, buy gigantic gantry cranes, and train staff to work at a new rhythm. That is how the world was born, in which one container of jeans from China can easily reach a store in New York. The journey of one pair of jeans, from factory to shelf. Let's trace the path of an ordinary pair of jeans to understand how this enormous logistics machine works. A store in New York sees that jeans are running out and sends a request to the central office. Headquarters collects requests from dozens of stores and places a large order with a manufacturer in China. The factory sews the jeans, packs them, and hands them to an exporter. The exporter brings in a freight forwarder, a company responsible for making sure the cargo passes all stages of the journey, from the factory to the port and then to the next link in the chain. The container is loaded onto a truck, and the truck goes to the port. That is where the magic of containerization begins. A massive crane lifts the standard container, moves it over the ship's deck, and carefully lowers it into a pre-calculated position. So that this wall of steel boxes does not collapse in a storm, the following are used. Twist locks, special locks on the corners of containers that snap shut and literally fasten containers to one another into a single structure. Lashing straps and rods. Metal tie-downs by which the lower rows of containers are additionally secured to the deck. After several hours of such jewel-like work, thousands of containers are already standing on board, and MSC Irena is ready to head out to sea. The Giant's Route, from Singapore to New York. Early Sunday morning. It is still dark, the city is asleep, and the bridge team is already at work. MSC Irena leaves one of Singapore's terminals, one of the key hubs of world trade. The first test is the Strait of Malacca. This is one of the busiest sea roads on the planet. Here, ships meet that are traveling from Asia to Europe to the Middle East to Africa. In the evening, navigation lights look like a traffic jam of trucks on a highway at rush hour. Only every truck weighs tens of thousands of tons. The captain has an experienced pilot, the bridge team is well drilled, and for them, such passages are almost routine. But the bigger the ship, the less room there is for error. Turning around or sharply dodging to the side on a behemoth like this is impossible. Next, the route leads through the Indian Ocean to the Suez Canal. And of course, the ocean would not be itself if it did not throw in a storm. Storm, stability, and tanks of water. Today's sailors live in a very different world than their predecessors. Captains receive fresh weather forecasts every day, and the company's shore office tracks the route and, if necessary, suggests detours. But it is still impossible to avoid bad weather completely. When the forecast promises serious seas, the crew begins preparations. The chief engineer redistributes fuel and water through the ballast tanks so the ship sails evenly and does not heel to the side. On deck, they check container lashings and tie-downs. On the bridge, they recalculate the course to enter the storm at the safest possible angle. To the viewer, it looks boring. A gray sea, rain, a couple of degrees of roll. But precisely such boring shots are a sign that everything on board was done correctly. Suez, European ports, and intermediate stops. After the storm, Sydney? No, the Suez Canal. This is one of the main faucets that connects Asia and Europe. The transit window is strictly scheduled. Arrive late or arrive too early, and you will wait. The passage through Suez is a story of its own. Dense traffic, narrow stretches, pilots, strict rules. For a giant like MSC Irena, it is almost a jeweler's operation. After the canal, the ship goes to Europe, for example, to a major port like Barcelona. Why does it not go straight to the United States? Because ship owners want maximum efficiency. At each call, it unloads some containers for Europe, takes on new ones for the United States or other countries. So one voyage turns into a chain of mini routes, Asia to Europe to United States. The final point is the port of New York. There, the cargo is again broken down onto trucks and trains. The container with our jeans ends up at a distribution center, and from there, on a truck, it goes to that very store where you will try them on. Market monsters. Who controls the seas? When you look at a ship like this, it is easy to forget about another giant, the shipping market. Today, about 85% of the container market is controlled by just 10 largest companies, and among them there are two heavyweight categories, Maersk and MSC. Together they carry more than a third of all the world's containers. So as not to tear each other apart in a competitive race, in the middle of the 2010s, the companies entered into an agreement known as 2M. Formally, it is not a merger, but a partnership, not to interfere with each other on key routes, to share costs where it is beneficial, to synchronize parts of their schedules. It sounds logical. The more stable the market, the more predictable prices are, for both companies and clients. But any concentration has a downside. COVID, which showed how weak our chains are. The pandemic became a perfect stress test for global logistics. Ports, factories, movement restrictions, all of that piled on top of each other. In the United States, two key ports suffered especially hard: Los Angeles and Long Beach. About 40% of the country's imported goods passed through them. At one point, dozens and then more than 100 ships were standing at the entrance to the ports, simply waiting for their turn. What went wrong? Warehouse space was packed to the limit. By the rules, containers could be stacked only up to a certain height and only in strictly designated zones. Those limits worked in peacetime, but in a crisis, they turned into a dead end. There were not enough port workers. Illness, restrictions, 24/7 shifts, all of that caused tension and resistance. There were not enough truckers. Even if a container was successfully unloaded, there were not enough drivers to pick it up from the terminal in time. And at the same time, demand from buyers only grew. People traveled less and ordered online more. Companies played it safe and ordered with a buffer. Ships stood in queues, containers accumulated at terminals, and end users, from laptop buyers to car dealerships, waited for deliveries for months. How stuck containers drove up car prices. At first glance, it might seem, so what? A ship was delayed on the way. But then you remember that about 90% of goods in the world travel by sea in a container at least once, and it stops being funny. One vivid example is the car market. A modern car is a computer on wheels, and the heart of that computer is microchips. A large portion of such chips is produced in Asia. When disruptions began, raw materials for chip production could not reach factories on time. The chips themselves did not reach auto manufacturers. Finished vehicles hung in limbo waiting for their brains. You saw the result yourself: reduced supply, rising prices, shortages of certain models. And all of it, partly because at the right moment there was not enough free container capacity or an available slot in a port. Why the race for giant ships is dangerous. MSC Irena is an impressive achievement of engineering thought. But the trend toward ever larger vessels has a serious downside. Such ships are economically more profitable, less crew per ton of cargo, lower fuel consumption per container, cheaper shipping for large clients. But there is a problem. Very few ports can handle these dimensions. Deepwater terminals with powerful cranes and modern infrastructure exist only in select points of the world. If for some reason one of these hubs breaks because of an accident, a crisis, a conflict, or a natural disaster, everyone feels the impact. A paradox appears. The more efficient each individual voyage becomes, the more fragile the entire system becomes. The future of global logistics. So what awaits us? Even bigger ships or more flexible supply networks? Some companies like Maersk are already betting on full control of the chain, from the factory to the client's door. They invest not only in ships, but also in terminals, railroads, truck fleets, and in fact, they try to remove intermediaries from the equation, the very freight forwarders. Others, like MSC, continue to grow precisely the fleet and container tonnage, trying to take the market by volume. Which approach will win? Time will show. One thing is already clear. Without serious investment in ports, infrastructure, and people, the growth of ship sizes alone will not save us from new logistics crises. The next time you see ordinary jeans or a familiar smartphone on a shelf, remember, behind it stands an entire world. A world of giant ships like MSC Irena, of people who, at night in a storm, check container lashings, of engineers who invent air lubrication of a hull, and of one long-haul trucker who, many years ago, simply got tired of waiting in a port. Our everyday purchases are the result of a huge system that rests on thousands of small details. And the better we understand how it works, the easier it is to notice the moment when one container in this chain starts going off plan. If you liked the episode, then hit the like button, write comments with everything you think about this, and subscribe to the channel for the richest. Here it's about luxury, wealth, and the lives of the most influential people on the planet. Thank you for watching, and right now, go watch the previous incredible episodes.